we shooting or like, are we?
Yeah.
Already?
We just roll right into
Okay.
it.
Yeah, so what's interesting for me is to be able to kind of like weave some sort of story. Like I need to have...
When you're creating films now, what attracts you to that?
It's not always about making like the right decision. It's just about making the most kind of informed decision.
Do you see that as a threat, or do you see...
You need to have a good story, good dialogue, good characters, and if you've got that, then at least you've got a chance.
But is that just throwing money at a problem too?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think like they've been around since like the human race, so people always want to, you know, tune into like stories.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick break from our show to say a massive thank you and a big shout out to one of our amazing sponsors, Dave DiStefano. Dave is a mortgage broker with over 13 years in the business, and Dave has a great rapport with a network of lenders, including big banks, credit unions, trust companies, financial institutions, and private funds. He will work on your behalf to help you find the best mortgage with the most agreeable terms and the lowest interest rate. After meeting Dave many times and having great discussions with him, he provides a level of confidence and comfort in knowing that he is going to take care of you. If you want to reach out to Dave, you can find his office on 6293 Thoroldstone Road in Niagara Falls. For more information or to make an appointment for any of your mortgage needs, call 905-933-1090. That's 905-933-1090. And thanks for listening. Back to the show.
What's going on, Meeting Gold listeners? It's Chris Battaglia, 416 Coffee. Use the coupon code Meeting Gold to get 10% off your first order at 416 Coffee. Enjoy the show.
And it's interesting that you brought up some of the shows that you're watching right now and how you break down the story element in a whole. Like, you look at it differently than what the average viewer would, and you can appreciate it a little bit more, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like for me, yeah, you know, like I come from like a narrative filmmaking background, right? So, you know, I think like what's innate to me and what's interesting to me is, are we shooting or like, are we?
Yeah.
Already?
We just roll right into
Okay.
it.
Yeah. So what's interesting for me is to be able to kind of like weave some sort of story. Like I need to have something sort of like connecting the video from like beginning, middle, and end, right? It needs to have that natural sort of like arc, natural through line.
Like a story arc.
Yeah.
So
yeah, not just like a,
yeah,
you know, I mean, not just like a cool concept, or it can't like it needs to be more than just like look cool and, you know, feel cool. I think it needs to have a substance, and the substance for me comes from like the narrative through line, right? So
interesting. What things are you watching? Let's start with some small talk here. What things are you watching right now that you love the story arc to?
Like in terms of like just movies,
shows,
whatever.
movies.
You know, here's what I've been trying to do lately. I tried to watch something old, right? So I've been watching a lot of movies from like the 70s and the 80s, right?
Interesting.
I just watched Poltergeist, Steven Spielberg's movie.
Yep.
And I tried to watch something new at the same time. So I watched Michael Bay's Ambulance, just to kind of be able to kind of, you know, like I don't want to be sort of like too much influence with the old stuff, which maybe is like a little bit slower paced. And then, you know, on the opposite end, the new stuff is like, you know, maybe quicker, and it's just different from how they used to do things. So I think like that juxtaposition of like old and new allows me to kind of like be able to kind of maybe sort of kind of, you know, do a hybrid of that, right?
Is that where you see your film journey set in stone? Like that's you want to be the in between and be able to provide ideas from a broad spectrum?
Yeah, like I mean, you know, my filmmaking, you know, right now I run a production company, but my sort of like goal is to be a filmmaker, or just almost like I don't want to say transition, but be able to kind of like play in the filmmaking space and the advertising commercial space at the same time. There's certain directors that do that, like Ridley Scott, the guy who made Alien, Blade Runner. He's got a production company. They do, some of the world's best commercials. At the same time, he's got a filmmaking career.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. Is that common?
Well, I mean, I think like when he started, so Ridley Scott started making commercials, like he was one of the first commercial directors. And him and his brother started up a company, Ridley Scott and Associates in England. And they started making commercials, and they used, I think he said he made 2,000 commercials before he ever made a film, right? And they used that as a sort of opportunity to kind of like hone their skills, get better, just be able to kind of like facilitate kind of a new aesthetic, a new look. And then they apply that to filmmaking.
Right.
So his, if you watch his first movies, they just kind of, the production value and the look is just a little bit more polished, a little bit more sort of like, commercial, right? So, he's continued doing that. Like he didn't sort of give up the commercial world. He transitioned to filmmaking. But the company has sort of gone on, and they still make music videos, commercials, and they have a roster of directors, and it's like one of the world's best companies. So that's kind of like, when it comes to inspiration, that's kind of what I want to sort of like maybe model myself.
That's where you get it from. Yeah. I want to take it back. You mentioned inspiration. When did the inspiration first start for you?
Well, like when I was a little kid, I grew up watching movies. There was always something fascinating to me about like the sort of like the filmmaking process. Like whenever I would see directors or like behind the scenes kind of like videos, I would always be just like super interested in like the process of like how films are made, how the directors work, how crews collaborate, how just like cameras were fascinating, right? So I've sort of wanted always to kind of I think that was always an interesting thing for me. When I was in high school, I had a sort of an inclination. I would sort of like go into something creative. I think like filmmaking for me, this is like before YouTube, before like social media, before any of this stuff.
Before anybody could just be a filmmaker.
Do it, right?
Yeah.
Filmmaking seemed a little bit sort of like out of just not a realistic thing, right? So I didn't sort of really even kind of contemplate that, even though I was making like in high school, I was like shooting stuff on like video and like making little movies with my friends all the time. I just didn't kind of like see it as a potential career. So, but what I did think was possible was like going into photography, and I used to like watch fashion television all the time. That again was fascinating for me, seeing the behind the scenes stories they used to do on photographers. So I told myself, I'm gonna be a fashion photographer, right? So I applied to Ryerson, the Ryerson University for photography, and I got in. It was like super hard. I think it took like 15 people out of like like the 10,000 that applied. So I got into Ryerson, and in the first year, there was like 3 branches, right, in the creative kind of space. There was photography, film, and digital imaging was just like becoming a thing, like with like Photoshop and all that stuff. And in the first year of study, everybody had to do a bit of everything. So they forced you to kind of like do filmmaking. They forced you to do like digital stuff. And I took a filmmaking class. And I think our assignment was like we were given, a camera and we had to shoot a movie. I ended up shooting like a, 1 minute like war film, right? And we shot it on like real cameras with real film, like not digital. It was like real film,
not an SD card.
That's right. And everything was manual, so I had to like manually focus everything. And I think so everybody had this assignment: do a 1 minute film. And then the whole class watched everybody's films. And I think my film was the only one that was in focus, because everybody was just like, kind of like didn't take the time to like focus properly. So everything was like, out of focus. But as soon as I saw my movie play on the screen, on the big screen, as soon as it came up and like the first frame, I was like, forget photography, I'm switching. I went down to like the The Office, and I'm like, next year, I want to like do film. I'm going to be a filmmaker.
So the addiction and the dopamine of seeing it on the screen just lit up. It was,
you know what? I think it was like, as soon as I saw that, and as soon as I saw that, like I did that, it's on a big screen. People are watching it. I can do this. Like it's possible. Like it seemed possible now. Right. I can like, why not study this? I love doing this. Why not study it? It's like, it's possible. Right.
So when you're creating films now, because now you're doing big commercial jobs, and branded content, which we'll get into all over the GTA and in Toronto and beyond, what attracts you to that? What attracts you to that? Is that still the same Filip in university that was watching his film on the big screen?
Yeah, like I think, you know, what appealed to me about filmmaking was to be able to sort of like tell a story, but create some sort of a response or an emotion in an audience, to get to like, you know, to be able to kind of like build that or create that for an audience, to be able to generate some sort of a feeling of emotion for an audience, right?
Right.
And obviously you can do that with films, but you know, commercials and branded content, you're still telling a story. You're still sort of like creating a feeling. You're still sort of creating visuals that will hopefully make an impact on your audience, on the person watching.
Right.
So I think, you know, that's what's interesting to me.
You mentioned storytelling, and that's been a consistent thing that's been brought up. I want to know, just for anybody listening who takes an interest in film, what are some of the things that you do initially in I guess, taking the first step in creating that storytelling process?
Like when I work on a project?
Yeah, when you're working on a project, what are things that you have to consider and things that you have to take into account when you want to tell a good story?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, a client comes to you with a sort of concept and idea. I mean, sometimes we have to kind of create the idea for them. It's kind of, sometimes it's different. Sometimes a client comes looking for us to sort of create the idea, so basically build the creative and then execute on that creative. Sometimes we work with creative agencies who work with a brand, say, you know, I don't know, a car company or you know, I don't know, a travel company, and they work with an agency, creative agency, who comes up with the creative. So that's kind of already done, and then we execute. But when we have to kind of come up with a creative, I always sort of like kind of look for, you know, at the end of the day, like, what is the story about? Like, what's the story that we could be telling? Whose point of view is the story from? Like, whose story are we telling? And, you know, what's the throw line? Like, you know, what's the beginning, middle, and end? Like, how can we sort of like tell that story, and how can we tell that story visually? Like, what would the visuals be to be able to like convey that story to an audience?
Right. Now, where my head goes is, these are the type of commercials and branded content pieces that you see on TV, right? Like, these are the ones that you see that are really well polished. Here's a controversial question that I want to hear your thoughts on. As social media begins to continually take off, and you see car brands like Lotus doing TikToks that are completely, I mean, like, I don't know if any, like, Johnny, maybe you've seen them, but like, they're just memes, like they're complete jokes, and they're getting millions of views and traction that way. How do you see that in comparison to what you're doing, and why somebody might do that and vice versa go with you instead of?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's all kind of marketing. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, a brand needs to be able to kind of like make itself known to an audience, build a relationship to an audience, right? So you do that, you know, through various means, right? You know, when a client has a brand and they come to a creative agency to kind of like spread the message, they might use radio, they might use print, they might use, you know, commercials, whatever. So, I mean, it's all kind of like part of marketing, right? So, you know, I mean, TikTok videos, that kind of social media, it's not sort of our forte. It's not what we specialize in. Again, we sort of like go, you know, we do the more kind of story-oriented, narrative kind of like stuff.
Bring out that emotion.
Yeah. And then, so if that's what you want, then you come to a company like ours. If you're looking to do cool kind of memes or TikToks, then, you know, there's a bunch of super creative people that, I mean,
Yeah,
I
hire
think
somebody
that's
in-house, yeah.
Yeah, that's a super kind of like, I mean, some of those things are super funny, and it takes this, you need to be skillful at making those. You need to know what you're doing. So I think, in that case, you go to the companies that specialize in that. So
it's interesting that you said that. And I think to back your point, the one thing that I've noticed, and I don't know, Filip, if you want to talk about this, but the TikToks that, a car brand or a restaurant might do that are memes and just funny, that's great. And it's getting millions and millions of views for probably the 1/10 of the cost that you would normally have to pay because it's just organic and it's viral. But is that actually translating to sales? Because at the end of the day, everybody's got to get paid. And so if you're doing that, if you're getting millions and millions of views, but you're getting millions of views from a 10-year-old scrolling through their phone, is that more valuable? Like, is 1,000 views of that just as valuable as 5 individuals who love cars and love a specific car brand in a commercial that tells a story about a car in a minute geared towards them? Like, the value between the viewership I see is really, the margins are just so different for the same result. So when you're talking about results, is that one of the things that you like when you're pitching and doing pitches for commercials like this?
Well, I think when it comes to our company, like, we're not so, that sort of stage of marketing is not really sort of what we kind of get our hands dirty in, right? So in terms of like, analytics, and in terms of like crunching the numbers, seeing what's most effective, I mean, that's kind of like, we're entirely removed from that process, right? So how we do work, again, is that a creative company, agency might come to us with a creative already thought up. So it's like, they've worked with the brand to kind of come up with an idea that they think might stick or kind of resonate with,
and you're elaborating on that.
That's right. And we're like, it's our job to take the budget that they give us and bring that to life, which, I mean, is a skill, and to do well, right?
Yeah.
To be able to, like, a lot of the stuff we do, I sort of label it as real stories, real people. So for a car brand, for instance, we've worked with Toyota, BMW, and we might, like, do a kind of a digital series about entrepreneurs who are, who have like eco-friendly businesses and happen to drive a Toyota. And the series of videos we're going to make for Toyota is basically sort of like short 2-3 minute documentaries about that person telling their story and showcasing, kind of tying the Toyota into that. Right?
Oh, that's really interesting. So that's what I see on TV. That's keep going with that. Keep going with the breakdown.
So that's kind of like what branded content is, right? So kind of like interesting content that an audience member might watch. They get something out of it. They might be inspired, or they might be informed, or they might be, motivated. And it's a soft sell for the brand. They're not shoving the product down your throat. It's kind of like, hey, here's this cool person doing cool things, and they happen to be driving X car.
You call that a soft sell.
Yeah, that's what kind of like branded content is all about, rather than your typical kind of TV commercial that kind of like is more sort of like, hard selling.
Like an insurance company telling you that we could do this rate.
Yeah. And funny enough, we just shot 2 TV commercials for an insurance company, which were, a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah.
Right? But, again, different kind of, different strategies, different kind of things, right? So, but we do a lot of the branded content stuff, which is oftentimes like real stories, real people, and it's a soft sell. And, in this case, you're working with non-professional, like they're real people. They're not actors, right? So,
hold on a second. Pause there.
Yeah.
You're not working with actors on?
Well, on commercials we are, but when we're doing a branded content and it happens to be a kind of a digital series about cool entrepreneurs, we're dealing with real entrepreneurs. They're not actors. They're like, it's an entrepreneur that makes, in Vancouver, we shot something with a guy that his company is called Chop Value, I think. Mm-hmm. And they make furniture out of chopsticks, out of reused, refurbished chopsticks, right? So again, we did a whole kind of like, 2-3 minute video about him. Again, he's not an actor, he's a real entrepreneur. And these people are nervous on camera. You need to know how to make them comfortable. You need to know how to kind of like tell their story, using effective visuals, and be able to kind of like work with them and make sure that what we get at the end of the day, tells is entertaining, is sort of grabs the viewer. Right. So that's
that's so funny that I brought up the insurance part as well. But when we talked about the social media side of it, the branded content, there's this big argument that social media, people are going to stop watching TV and go to like subscription platform stuff, just like Netflix and all that. And then they're going to go to social media and, just scroll through like TikTok videos that are like 10 seconds long that are just random memes. Do you see that as a threat to the industry that really both of us are in, but you are in more heavily? Do you see that as a threat, or do you see yourself working alongside of that in the next few years, having to adapt? Or do you think that there's still going to be that heavy need for those 2 to 3 minute long videos, wanting the...
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, I think at the end of the day, people, like, stories have been around since like the human race. So people always want to, tune into like stories, whether it's like, feature films, it might not be in the theater. We might be all watching it on our phones or whatever on our laptops. But people still want those stories. They're still gonna like, watch films. And if there's something engaging, if it's a 1-2 minute story, they're still gonna want to tune into that. But some of those branded content could be longer. We've done, branded content that's like, half an hour episodes, right?
Really?
For television, right? So, at the end of the day, I think like stories are like, people are into stories. They're going to be into stories. I think, social media, it's here and I'll be here. And I think it's just another thing people are into, right?
It's like,
there's been times when like my wife and I have sort of like, it's Friday night. We've sort of like, kind of like prepared our snacks and we're going to watch something on Netflix. And, like everybody knows it takes forever to find something good on Netflix, right? You just kind of like get stuck like scrolling through stuff. And there's been times when it's kind of like, she'll get on her phone and I'll get on my phone, and then we'll sort of like be scrolling through somebody's, like through the same account, like say some like funny memes or whatever. We're literally like, on our own phones, scrolling through the same thing and just like kind of like laughing together.
Yeah.
And then, we almost like forget to watch the Netflix show. It's like the phone has grabbed our attention. Whoever's doing these memes is just like so engaging and so funny. Like we're watching that for like the next hour. Right?
It's interesting. And the reason that I brought this up is because I'm very torn on what is there one set direction we're going to head as a society in terms of the social media side or like TV? And what I've kind of realized about social media is it's a lot of quick fix. Like, it's just quick fixes. Like, I honestly, if you're asking me on the spot, I don't know the last thing I saw as like anything on Instagram. Like, I couldn't remember that. You know what I mean? Whereas like a movie, I remember. Now, maybe it's because I'm watching an hour and a half long movie, but at the same time, how much time do I spend on social media a day on my phone? So I think that like you said, the need for storytelling will always be there, and it will always be the thing that people relate and remember to.
Yeah. I think like for me, it's like, story is important. And I think like when it comes to social media, like I could never like, I'm sure we've done this before, but like, I like just to be able to kind of like do social content to fill a pipe and just to kind of like put something out for the sake of putting it out. And it's got no depth to it. I think like it's not really appealing to me. So
is that just throwing money at a problem too?
Well, I don't know. I think like where I find like social media useful is like if it does something for me, either like makes me laugh, so entertains me, or sort of educates me, which goes, everybody who's like a social media expert says, make sure your content, delivers something for people. You want to make them laugh, or you want to educate them in some sort of way. If it's just kind of like something stupid that's
bland,
it's like, and it offers no value to anybody, then it's just kind of like, to me, a waste of time. So again, I think like everything is valuable. It's just what you're delivering with it, right? So
Right.
I think like, you know, what are you contributing to society? Right. I think that's kind of like,
That's a
we
good
always
way
try
to
to
look
kind
at
of
it.
like keep that in mind. Like, are you sort of like, you know, again, it doesn't have to be sort of like super educational. It could be entertaining, or you could sort of try to kind of like pass on sort of like takeaways or lessons via sort of entertainment or stories or whatever. I think
Right.
like, you know, again, if you're sort of striving to kind of contribute in some sort of a, you know, some sort of a way to society, to people, I think it's commendable.
It's
right?
commendable.
Yeah.
The one thing that I am so interested about your industry specifically, and I think anybody, whether they're in film or not, would be, is just the process of creating these TV commercials. Like, you see this stuff on TV, and the majority of people, if they're not in the film industry, like, don't think about, like, there's a guy behind that camera filming that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like a robot or whatever it is. But you know what I'm saying? Like, people don't think about that. So I'm curious, kind of break us through the process of doing a super high budget commercial, what that would look like, what the shoot dates look like. I mean, I just want to elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like that's talked about enough, like the behind the scenes of it.
I mean, so I'll give you kind of walk you through the process of, you know, the creative comes to us, right? So we say we've already won the job, right? So we're working with an agency who's working with a brand, and they come to us with creative. Sometimes they might have storyboards already done.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes it's just a script, right? So if it's a script, the Creators Bureau, our company, will sort of work with a storyboard artist to kind of like storyboard that concept out. Right. And then, you know, I as a director sort of have to kind of like look at the script and kind of have to sort of like try to visualize it. How would I present this? And, you know, as a director, then you have to kind of think about, okay, what, you know, how would I shoot this so that it's most sort of effective, or it kind of gets across what it's supposed to get across, right? So you kind of storyboard it out. And then, you know, everything basically, like the client has a say kind of along each step of the way, right?
So you break it down into steps.
That's right. So you know, then, you know, we storyboarded. Then obviously you need to cast it, assuming it's got you know, talent, actors. You need to be able to find actors. You need to be able to like clothe them, so wardrobe, makeup. You know, say you're shooting at a location, like a house, for example, that needs to be furnished. Or if it's a studio, you need to be able to, you know, like set it up, right?
Set it.
So the client will want to sort of have a say in everything. So what we do is then we put together a deck for everything, right? So we work with we bring on a production designer. So they're responsible for kind of like all the art department stuff.
So you're aligning, Philip, are aligning the people in place.
Yeah, so we have a creative team that we work with. They're, you know, freelance professionals that we bring on.
Well, that's typically the industry too, right?
So, you know, they move on from project to project. Say we're doing something, I'll, you know, call up the people, my team that I usually work with. You know, so we'll bring on a director of photography, a production designer, you know, makeup people, grips, gaffers, all kinds of technical people, camera people. But, you know, again, with creative stuff, say we have a production designer, we'll work with them. Again, me as a director, will work with them to kind of, you know, how are we going to how is this place, this world going to look like? You know, what kind of a feeling are we going for? Is it going to be kind of, you know, a cluttered house? Is it going to be modern and polished? Is it going to be classic? Like, again, everything comes back to the creative. Like, what does the script call for, right?
Like what's the
vibe,
the juice,
yeah, right. So again, based on that, that's how everything sort of like, again, it influences the essence of what the commercial is about, influences every creative aspect of that goes into it.
I see.
Right. So we bring on a production designer. They'll work with us to kind of like, okay, you know, how is this going to look like? And they'll do a creative deck. Right. So they might have reference pictures of like, hey, here's what we think the house will look like. Here's what the props will be. And literally, like, they'll have photographs of like, here's the spoons we're going to use. Here's the plants we're going to use.
Detailed,
it's that detailed. Like, the client wants to see everything. Now they might not kind of like, you know, they might kind of like skim through it.
Yeah, that's
quickly,
fine.
But it needs to be, you better know like what you're putting in front of the camera, right? So you need to present them with all those things, right? And then same goes for wardrobe. You know, what's the talent going to wear? You know, here's the kind of couple potential different looks. They kind of pick a look. Once we cast, we do a kind of a fitting day and a rehearsal day. So we might get the wardrobe stylist to work with the talent to kind of try on a couple different looks, take pictures. Again, we put together a deck. Here's wardrobe option 1. Here's 2. Here's 3. Which one do you like better? Do you want to like mix and match? Like, so the client kind of like decides, and we sort of always give our recommendation. Like we like, you know, look we recommend look 1 for this talent. And then, you know, they might agree with that or not. At the end of the day, it's their decision, right? So, but again, we build out these decks for everything: props, art department, wardrobe, you know, again, cast.
And you've learned what's necessary to build the deck off of just from the constant, like just constantly doing more and more and more and more.
Yeah, and I think like the more, excuse me, the more kind of like prep and pre-production and kind of preparation you have at the initial stage, the less problems you're going to run into on production day. Right. Because when we're shooting, it's usually like a 1 to 2 day, like 2 day shoot.
Oh, it's not like super long, eh?
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, say it's a typical, say it's just a commercial.
Like a 1 minute?
Yeah. Yeah. 1 30-second, 1 minute commercial. Again, depends on what the creative is, but if it's just sort of like, you know, I mean, in the case of these like insurance commercials we just did, you know, they took place in a home. We shot 2. 1 took place in a kitchen, 1 in a bedroom, and again, you know, 1 day shoot, right? So, you know, with a 1 day shoot, you need to make sure like everything's working like clockwork.
Perfect.
Right? You don't want to be sort of like, you know, trying to figure out what the wardrobe is going to be or what the props are going to be. You already have figured that out. It's just time to kind of like execute. So you want to do as much prep beforehand, before the shoot as possible, to be able to kind of, you know, make sure there's no obstacles, there's no problems when you're shooting. You want a nice, smooth shoot. Because, you know, inevitably there's going to be some issues that come up during the shoot that you didn't foresee. So the less other problems that you have, the more you can kind of just like figure out whatever's the immediate.
So how much of your job is the creative side, but then maybe this blends well, but the problem solving side as well? Because as the director, I mean, you make the executive decisions. You are the guy that like you, then it's the creative agency, then the client, or sometimes just you and then the client. Yeah. Right.
So yeah, I mean, like when you're shooting, there's always some sort of a question issue. Like, you know, actors might have a question. There might be a wardrobe thing. Like maybe the wardrobe that, you know, we picked, it's just not jiving on set. Like it's just, it's just not working. Maybe it's conflicting with something in the scene. So you need to switch things up. And, you know, people come to you with questions all the time. So you need to be able to like respond quickly and just make decisions, right? You don't want to sort of like be on the fence about things. You need to be able to react quickly. Again, just so kind of like the train can stay moving, right? You don't want to, you know, production is like a big train that kind of is on tracks and it's like speeding ahead.
You just got to keep it,
like
keep it going.
If you don't want it to stop, you don't want it to go off the rails or you're in trouble. It just needs to move forward. And there's obstacles that, you know, kind of like fall on the train tracks, and you need to like remove those
before it falls off the rails. Yeah.
So, you know, it's always like people with questions. Hey, do you want this? Do you want this? And you need to be able to like, and I think like, you know, the kind of the important thing is to remember is, it's not always about making like the right decision. It's just about making the most kind of informed decision, but making a decision. Right? You just want to be able to like keep people kind of doing, you don't want to be the thing that blocks things or stops things. You want to kind of keep the momentum going. So if somebody comes to you with a question, make a decision right away so things stay moving.
So because you play such a role in what it is that you do, in terms of where you're looking at yourself, you had mentioned director and real, just like directing movies and whatnot. Do you see yourself being able to do both? Do you want to do both? Is there a succession plan for you to be replaced inside your company as not the director, and then you can focus more on movies? Or like, how does that work, and where's your head at with that? Because even myself, I'm in a same boat. You know, you play such a role in creative design and branding. You don't think anybody could ever replace you if you ever wanted to.
Yeah. So I think, like, I mean, you know, if you look at again, just going back to like Ridley Scott's company, I think, you know, where kind of how I see things sort of happening is, you know, say the kind of the filmmaking thing sort of happens. I mean, it's all about, you know, it's a lot of, it's a long game with that, right? So, you know, I write the scripts that I kind of eventually want to sort of direct and produce. That takes a long time. Then you need to pitch, you need to secure financing, you need to actually execute, edit. I mean, it's a long process, right? So in between that, you need to kind of like be creatively doing something.
And embrace that you have to do that.
Yeah. So, you know, like you might do commercials or music videos. But again, I think that's all doable just given the amount of time that, like, you know, long form narrative takes, right? And as far as the company goes, I mean, you know, like I sort of see us eventually having a roster of like young directors being able to kind of, you know, work on commercials and branded content videos that I might not want to do myself, or I might just not have time to do, or there might be somebody better to execute that, right? So, you know, there might be sort of like directors who specialize in, you know, food photography, for instance, and like food commercials. That's not necessarily my forte. We've done that. But, you know, there's people who are sort of better skilled at doing those.
Interesting. So
our company
the who.
could take on, but a different director could like execute.
Answering the who, not how. How instead of how can you do everything under the sun, who can I find to help me do this? Right.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, what's always been interesting, why I think filmmaking and just the creative kind of world appealed to me was because it allows for sort of creative collaboration. I always sort of liked collaborating with people, whether it's department heads, again, you know, wardrobe people or stylists or, you know, production designers. I like collaborating with people, and I like sort of, you know, sometimes, you know, I might produce the spot, but somebody else might direct it for a company. And, you know, if they're sort of better skilled or maybe a better fit for that. So, and I like that collaboration of like me being able to sort of like help them facilitate and make that content. So
what movie would you create that's in the back of your mind right now that you want to see on camera? Because as you continue to build your company, it will slowly get more into what you had just discussed, and you will get more into the movie creation business, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, you know, going back to what I said about like watching the old and the new, right? So I think I'm not so much into like superhero movies, and I'm not so
Marvel.
And I'm not so much into like sort of like social commentary movies, which are kind of like very popular now. I think people want something different. I think people are sort of looking for kind of stories that are like entertaining and fun to watch, but are kind of like have a bit of depth to them, right? So as an example, like the kind of movies I'm into, you know, there's a movie done, I mean, goes a while back, but Drive with Ryan Gosling. Do you remember that movie? It's a bank robbery.
Johnny does.
It's a bank robbery movie. He plays he's a stunt driver in the movies, and he's hired as a getaway driver by people looking to rob banks, right? But it's a very kind of like cool character driven film with a great story and awesome visuals. And I think it's just that kind of a cool combination of like how old movies used to be and new movies, and it's just kind of like it's a nice kind of,
it's a good blend in between.
It's a good blend in between. Kind of character driven, kind of like plot oriented, just kind of entertaining things with depth to them.
It is interesting now that you say that we have seen, I mean, movies nowadays almost some movies start with a climax. Like some movies start with the heat of the moment, and then the plot is how they deal with it, right? And I guess that maybe that's been around for 50 years. But what I do find interesting is we have seen movies just like get way, way quicker in terms of the pacing and the action and all that kind of stuff when you watch in comparison to another one 50 years ago, right? Is that attention spans, or like what is that in society that has made that adjustment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like my favorite movie is The Godfather, and I think like, you know, some people think it's like super boring, right? And I was just like, oh my God, it just. Anyways, but it is what it is. I mean, like, you know, people are sort of like, you know, as soon as you're born now, it seems like you have a cell phone and your mind is wired a certain way. And even when, you know, like I have kids, when I watch movies with my kids, I see, you know, how their minds kind of work, how they absorb content, what's kind of when they start tuning out. So, you know, I think like it's inevitable that we kind of like movies need to kind of move at a certain pace. But at the same time, if your story is super interesting and engaging, you can slow things down. I mean, you just got to be interesting, you know, even if it's slow, if it's interesting, people will tune in. So I don't know. It's a bit of a tricky thing.
It's now you're getting me because you're so right. I'm looking back on the movies that I've watched, and like Interstellar is my by far the most favorite movie I've ever watched in my entire life.
Okay.
I tear up, I cry every single time I watch it at the end. I will watch that movie constantly. Same with Inception, like the Nolan brothers, what they did with both those was incredible. And I find myself, once you get attached, you are so involved with a story that that is your reality even after watching the movie for a little bit.
Yeah.
Like Wonder Woman did that for me too. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I look back at the movies that I've seen, and you're so right, is yes, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, but at the end of the day, in some ways maybe challenging directors more because it's forcing them to engage the story more, get people even more engaged than before with storytelling, with characters and relationships. I mean, what's your comment on that?
Yeah, I think like what you said about just characters is super important because it's not just the story, right? Like if you look back at some of your, you know, like the movies you liked, it's not, you know, sure, the story was interesting, but it's the characters you kind of remember, like Back to the Future, Beverly Hills Cop, like The Predator, Terminator, right? Like you remember those characters, right? And I think like sometimes nowadays, you know, we have sort of like people kind of try to manufacture interesting characters, but they don't seem like genuine and real. I think like there's this sort of like, you know, kind of like facade about them that kind of like doesn't connect with people.
How much of that is I'm glad we're on this topic because now I'm really interested because I remember watching, like I said, I remember watching movies that I think like one that comes to mind is just like the basic Netflix ones, like Addison Rae did a movie. And it was horrible. Like it was the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. I don't even remember any of the characters. And the only reason I remember is because some celebrity did it. And then I look at Interstellar and I think, oh my God, I know every character and I know who they are, how they act, why they react to things, how they react to things. How much of that is the actor and how much of that is you as a director?
Well, I think like it's, you know, there's a kind of an important thing in there. It's the like writing, right? So I think in movies, it really sort of like starts with the script, right?
Is that like the number one thing that matters?
So, I mean, like you can have the best director and the best actor, but if the script is shit, the movie's going to be no good, right? So I think it starts with stuff on the page. You need to have a good story, you know, good dialogue, good characters. And if you've got that, then at least you've got a chance, right? And then, you know, when it comes to movies, I think most important thing for directors to be able to like cast it really well, right? I mean, they say like 90% of a film's potential success comes down to like, you know, obviously other than the script, casting, right? If you've got
it does, eh?
Yeah, like if you've cast it well, you just kind of like sit back and let your actors basically, you know, do what they're good at.
So
right?
the goal is you don't have to, like, if you get on the set of Friends, if you get Jennifer Aniston, you don't have to direct her per se on how to act because she's so, and she's able to get so involved in that
I mean,
character?
like with something like Friends, she probably knows that character. So, I mean, she lives, breathes that character. She probably doesn't need a director kind of like direct her. There might need to be some direction, but I mean, it's her sort of driving stuff in terms of that character. When it comes to films, I think like, a director, actors always have questions. They need to, they might not be sure about something. So that's, if you've cast it well, the actor will be able to kind of like interpret that story well, but they might still need your input and your direction in terms of like, okay, I'm a bit kind of like torn, or I'm a bit confused. Can you clarify? They need a springboard. They need somebody to be able to like talk to about that. That's where a director comes in, right? But it shouldn't be sort of like kind of, I don't think like pulling a performance out of people. I mean, if you've cast it well, your actors should be able to kind of like deliver.
So that's
right?
okay.
And
So
it
that's
should
my
be kind
next
of like, I don't want to say easy, but I mean, it should feel natural, right?
So my next question then is kind of on that. Like take Friends, because I've watched Friends over and over again. Let's use Jennifer Aniston. How much was she just genuinely Rachel? And how much was she Jennifer Aniston acting?
I mean, I have no idea, but
or just in general, I guess if you cast it well, are you casting it well on?
Yeah, I think like when you're looking at say you're a director and you're looking to cast, you're working with a casting director. You see the character on the page, and hopefully they leap out. Hopefully they like speak to you. You read, the character, and it just like, I know who this character is, right? Hopefully that's what a director kind of like has that feeling. And then you kind of like look at, okay, who's out there that could kind of like, who matches that, that spirit. They might look completely different. It might not be like, they might be physically completely different than what's on the page, but they might embody that character. Like,
so you are looking for some of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, you kind of like, who do you see in that role? Like, who do you think would be a natural fit? I think you're trying to find like that natural fit, right? And again, there's exceptions to the rule, because sometimes you might want to sort of like go against type. And it's like, this actor's used to playing really bad guys, but you might want him to like play all of a sudden like the good guy in your story and be able to like mess with the audience. His perception a little bit. Again, depending on what the story is.
Like
if you're trying to like confuse people, if it's like a murder mystery and you cast like the bad guy that everybody thinks is the bad guy.
It was Kevin Hart,
and the good, you know what I mean? Like in the good guy role, then it's gonna mess with people a little bit. So I mean, there's kind of like, there's nothing set in stone. There's an exception for everything, but generally speaking, when it comes to casting, you're like, what's the natural fit? Hopefully you can cast a person that can kind of like embody who the character is, and you don't have to like, kind of strain and kind of like tear your hair out of your head to kind of like get that
bring it out of them. Yeah, because I would be curious to know some of the best actors in the world, like Chris Hemsworth. Is he a little bit of Thor inside of him, where he's demanding and he is, I guess when you see him, he holds his head high and he's got his chest out naturally, and that's just him naturally? Or is that just a really good actor that is completely different? Or like Robin Williams, was he genuinely funny? My mind's now asking those questions of, were these people, or are these people just such good personalities and can mold it in a way that a script sees fit, and then they build movie like Kevin Hart or Matthew McConaughey or, The Rock? Like, movies are built to them at their point. Like, that's how big they are. So I guess when you get that big, maybe it's just built to your personality. But
yeah, I think, I mean, again, I think, the probably the directors are looking for people that can kind of like bring something that character has that the actor already sort of embodies. Right. So,
Filip, before we end off today, we have like a fun thing that we do, maybe hopefully, but we ask our last guest a question.
Okay.
To ask you, and they have no idea, like they had no idea who you were. And so the question is a little bit deeper because we had a deeper conversation with our last guest, Evan. And Evan asked you, what is your dream and why haven't you done it yet?
Well, I mean, again, I think the dream would be kind of like to be able to do feature films. And I think, I mean, why haven't I done it yet? I'm in the process of trying to do it.
Why not, Filip? Why not?
Yeah. Again, I think it's like, it's a hard sort of game, and I think it's a long game, and I think you need to be kind of like patient, and you need to be, I sort of realized that with something like filmmaking, it's important to kind of like, build your skills and work on your craft, right? Like, I think, I have a sort of a deep respect for the craft of filmmaking, right? And I'm, again, trying to kind of like always improve, sort of educate myself. But at the same time, you can only sort of like spend kind of like training so much. At the end of the day, you need to kind of like take the steps to actually do it, right? So, I am sort of actively taking those steps to be able to kind of like, write things and pitch projects. And so I'm in the process of kind of like, going after that.
Getting there. And the other thing too is, especially in filmmaking, the truth is the more time you spend in it, naturally, hopefully, the better that you get, right? So it's not something that, I want to like, you look at some directors, the best directors in the world, they didn't become that in their first 5 years. Like they've been in movies, like I wonder how long have the Nolan brothers been? Decades, right?
Yeah,
decades.
A long time, yeah.
In that industry, So, it takes time. Yeah. Now, I'll let you ask a question for our next guest. Can't tell you who they are. What is a question that you would want to leave for the next guest on our next show?
Okay, if you could be a lead singer in any boy band or girl band, who would you be, and what would that band be?
Where does that question stem from?
I don't know.
Just a fun
I think it's
random
just like kind of like I think totally something random that
they'll laugh
would kind of tell us a lot about that person.
Random questions. They do actually tell a lot about people, eh?
Yeah. I've been listening to a lot of like poppy music lately. I don't know. Maybe that's where it comes from. Or I have daughters. They listen to a lot of like, Taylor
I love that.
Swift and all that stuff.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. Filip Terlecki, I said that right, from the Creators Bureau, joined us today to talk about filmmaking, how commercials are made, the process, and casting in between.
Secrets revealed.
The secrets revealed. That might actually be a really good title. Actually, you just gave us a pretty good one.
Awesome. Cool.
That's why that's why we need you here. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Actually, it's incredible. You guys have been blowing up the podcast the last few days. We've got about 100 downloads just on a Thursday alone, which is fantastic, and over 700 just in the last 10 days. So thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll see you in the next episode. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube or any social media accounts. Ask us questions that you want us to ask the next guests. Cheers.